The only God. Welcome, everyone. I appreciate you all joining us today. It's another great day here on the Cherokee Reservation. We are going to be joined today by language specialist and instructor Ryan Mackey. I'm going to get him on right now. We appreciate having him today, to come and talk to us a little bit about the language programs and about everything that's being offered. So we'll go ahead and get it started. I'll say a prayer real quick to get us started in a good way, and then I will go ahead and turn everything over to Ryan. So if you guys will just join me really quick. Unetlanai, we come to you in prayer today. We give you thanks for this day. We thank you for all of our blessings. We thank you for the opportunity to come together as Cherokee people, to lift one another up, to educate each other, and to help each other out. Pray that you please be with those who are ill and who are facing adversity today, Creator. Pray that you please just put your hand over them and help them. What up? Amen. All right, everyone. Like I said, I don't think I said, but my name is Abraham Bearpaw. I'm the Special Projects Officer for Cherokee Nation Community and Cultural Outreach. And, I'm really happy to have Ryan on today. CO Ryan, I appreciate you joining us today.
Good to be here. Well, Abraham.
So, language is something that, of course, it is vital to our people and our culture. I previously, I just left working for a tribe where they have 4 language speakers left. And, it's just, that's just seems so dire to me. I'm really, happy, and I feel blessed for all the resources that we do have in the Cherokee Nation, and, all of the people who are working every day to perpetuate our language. It's something that is hard if you don't grow up with it, to get back into, it can be frustrating. So I appreciate you coming on, to just help everyone, learn a little bit more about what learning language is about, how they can go about it, and what they need to do. So I'll turn it over to you. What up, Ryan?
Well, appreciate you everything. Si on the God the one. I again Wade gali scale to like my name is Wade or Ryan, and I have the privilege of working for the Cherokee Nation. I grew up here on what we now get to call the reservation, the 14 county jurisdictional area. They used to just call it Northeastern Oklahoma when I was growing up. We have this little state of Oklahoma map, and in the right corner there was like a couple of squares, just little patchwork squares, and it said Kenwood Indian Reservation. The Oklahoma state maps don't say that anymore. I think Oklahoma did away with that. But because of a recent ruling, we can call our original jurisdictional area, we can call it the reservation now. So that's something that I think we should be proud of. It means that we have the potential to be able to do more for our people. Ultimately, though, what it comes down to is for the last 100 years or so, Cherokees have had to really take care of themselves. It's been an extended family thing, We took care of our elders, we took care of our younger people. It was a community thing. And so as important as surviving as a people has been to us, we had to take care of our families first. We had to take care of our communities first. And it's really just been in the last 30 years or so since Wilma P. Started leading the tribe, when we started to focus on providing services for our people. And that's enabled our people to not worry as much about survival. Once they started to have some food and some water and some resources, and they didn't have to worry about the survival of their family, the survival of themselves, they could start to think about ideas. They could start to think about more abstract things, language, cultural identity, ceremony, things that were just survival before. we could think beyond ourselves. We could think beyond our immediate concerns and think about something larger. And that's gotten better and better. And that means that our tribe, although it still provides services, it's starting to provide resources, language resources. We're starting to worry more about maintaining our identity, maintaining our culture. For generations, people had to worry about trying to just get by. And if you can't put food on the table for your family, there's no way you're going to be concerned about how they say something in Cherokee. Language for us just became a means of communication, and we were told by the state that we needed to speak good English. Our own experience showed us that if we didn't speak good English, then we would suffer. So our elders made sure that our young people spoke English. My generation is it has a couple of native speakers in it. What I mean by native speakers are first language Cherokee speakers. Most of them are in the generation above me, my parents' generation. But we do have a couple of younger folks. And the thing is, even though they talk Cherokee, they don't sound exactly like the elders do, because they haven't had the same life experiences. They haven't had the same opportunity to speak language on a daily basis. The elders, they grew up in a world where Cherokee was the norm. And so when they were children, they were raised in the Cherokee language. And, you know, it wasn't this way for all Cherokee families, but in the heart of the Cherokee Nation, what we call the 5 counties, includes Cherokee County, but also Mays County, Delaware County, Adair County, our largest population of Cherokee speakers, Sequoia County. This is the heart of Cherokee tribal identity. And in our rural communities, the language was the language of the people, the language of the day. And as time went by, that has changed. So nobody really in my generation has grown up the way that our elders did, and my grandparents did. I was young. I got to hear the language. I knew some words. In high school, we didn't have Cherokee as a world language requirement. We could take Spanish, we could take German. But unless somebody in your family taught you Cherokee, you probably weren't going to have much exposure to it. The majority of our Cherokee families live outside of those rural communities. That's just a small fraction of our population that got to grow up the way that my grandparents did. Most folks, they had to survive. And as early as the time of Oklahoma statehood, the allotment period, some of our families began to move off. Some of our families had to integrate for the sake of survival and try to take on as much mainstream culture as they could, and that included the English language, just to ensure their survival so that they could be successful. And this means that for those people that had to have the language and culture as a means of survival, they maintained it. For communication, they kept the language. They knew how to live off the land, how to gather mushrooms, wild plants, hunt, farm. Those are the communities where the language and the culture has maintained its greatest strength, where when those things were still needed for survival. Other families, they tried to integrate for survival. So now we're left with, you know, a generation of people my age and younger that had elders in their family that grew up in a very tribal or traditional way, but they themselves didn't have the same experience. I had an English education. All the people around me when I was growing up that weren't my family, they spoke English. And so it's no wonder that most Cherokees don't have the language. That said, out of over 360,000 Cherokees, we have around 2,000 people that can still speak our language fluently. Ultimately, this means that it's just a fraction of our population that's hanging on to this key aspect of our cultural identity to be shared with all the future Cherokees. So in the last 20 years, we realized that this was going to be a challenge we would have to overcome. So we began to cultivate our resources. And it's just been within the last 10 or so years that we've had some success at passing the language down to somebody that didn't grow up speaking it. For generations, the only way to speak Cherokee was to grow up with it, to have it as your primary language. While our elders went to boarding school or they were forced into a public school system that didn't allow them to speak Cherokee, so they were forced to learn English. And they didn't want their children and grandchildren to suffer the same fate, so the language has slowly drifted away from the younger people, just for the sake of survival. That's left us with very few speakers, and out of those 2,000 or so speakers we have, almost all of them are over the age 65. Most of them are grandparent age or older. Most of them are not raising children, and if they are, they're raising their grandchildren. And a lot of times they don't have time to sit around and talk Cherokee to them, especially when those grandchildren also have to go to public school and be successful in mainstream society. So it's almost like there's this machine that's working against it. So about 15 years ago, the tribe started a language immersion school where they would teach the little kids how to talk Cherokee. More than that, though, they taught them all the mainstream academic subjects that you're used to from a public school: math, science, reading, writing, social studies, civics, but they taught all of those things using the Cherokee language. We struggled because when we learn these subjects in school, we're learning them in a language that we already speak. When these immersion kids are learning these subjects, they're also learning the language that goes with it. And the teachers, a lot of times, although they're first language Cherokee speakers, master speakers, they're also public school teachers. They have teacher certification. But it doesn't mean that they were trained to teach people how to understand these complicated subjects in Cherokee. So it's a learning process. And in this, I got to experience it. My own son, Golly Sieg, he went to the immersion school. I was there as a teacher for a while, really more of like a substitute teacher, a teacher's aide. I wasn't a real teacher. My Cherokee just wasn't good enough. But I experienced it, and it was challenging. And I have to commend all the teachers and all the people that have worked so hard to make it as successful as it's been. But it's become apparent that if the children are speaking to the teachers, but they aren't speaking it at home, language becomes the language of instruction, not the language of their identity, not the language of their culture or of their family or of their community. So they don't necessarily associate the Cherokee language with being Cherokee until they're older. They're told that's what this is for. By then, they've struggled to learn all these difficult things in the language, and sometimes they don't have a healthy relationship with the language. So we had to make sure that older folks were learning Cherokee too. We talked our leaders under the previous administration into starting an adult immersion program, and they were open and willing to this idea that adults would learn to speak Cherokee just like the kids were in the immersion school. So we had to decide who we're going to teach. We thought we should teach people that are going to pass it on. We need to teach teachers. They don't all have to become immersion school teachers, but they need to make a commitment to speak the language and teach the language. If we're going to devote this much time and effort and resources into learning Cherokee, we should make sure that the Cherokee people get a good return investment. So we're going to pay people. We're going to pay people to learn Cherokee. Not a lot, trust me. These folks are struggling. They're certainly not wealthy. We give them a living wage, enough to get by. It's really an educational gift. Is what it's called. It's almost like a scholarship. So they have enough to get by, but they're not making money off the language. They come to this master apprentice program, this adult immersion program, 5 days a week, 8 hours a day. So it's a 40-hour work week, and it lasts for 2 years. By the end of it, they're out. They're able to have conversations, but they still don't speak like our elders. They still don't speak like the old folks, but they can speak Cherokee. Not perfectly. We don't call them speakers. They themselves don't call themselves speakers when they graduate the program, because we've associated this title of speaker for those folks that spoke it as their first language. Still, though, folks that graduate our program can communicate, and they can take what they have learned, teach it to others, and use it to continue learning for themselves. And some of our graduates have gotten very far in the language. Some of them are highly proficient, much more advanced than we ever thought that they would be. So as time goes on, maybe we will have some real second language speakers that can stay up with our elders, but we're still working at it. When we started this Master Apprentice Language program, there were already programs available to our people. We already had a lot of language initiatives. We've been thinking about it and working on it for a couple of decades. Some of our first Cherokee language teachers, like Durbin Phelan and Anna Six-Killer, they started in the 70s. Their initial goal, though, was not to create second language learners. Their goal was to teach native speakers how to read and write Cherokee, so they could teach other native speakers how to read and write Cherokee. According to a survey that came out in the early 90s, only 4% of our Cherokee speakers were literate. And that means that the most abstract, highest order of thinking in Cherokee that could be written down was not available to them. All they had was word of mouth. And luckily, they were smart, and they learned a lot by word of mouth, by listening and speaking. But they all knew that they wanted to access written Cherokee. And so the first language efforts in the Cherokee Nation were really community-wide. They were really community-driven, and they were driven by native speakers that wanted to pass literacy on to other Cherokee speakers. As time went by, these developed into language classes that were sponsored by Cherokee Nation, community classes. And when people started coming to these community classes, it wasn't just Cherokee speakers that wanted to read and write. There were people that wanted to learn to speak. But these classes had a limited time that they could spend with their students. And one of the things that we learned eventually is it takes much more time to become proficient in Cherokee than we had originally anticipated. Everybody that has learned English, that used to be, they grew up in a Cherokee speaking environment, but they went to school and they learned English, they said it was really, really hard on them. Our elders would tell us this, and when we were trying to learn Cherokee, we thought that was really hard. But we didn't give up. We pastored, we practiced, we did everything we could. We tried to learn through reading and writing. We tried to learn through listening. We tried to learn through talking. It turns out it's a combination of as many of these things as possible. And every learner is going to be a little different. So the more you can provide them with, the more successful they're going to be. But one of the things that cannot be overlooked is the time that it takes in the language to become comfortable with it and familiar with it, if you're going to have any hope of mastering it. And there's just no substitution for that time. We have several programs right now at the Cherokee Nation. I had already mentioned that we started with community language classes. Well, these have been expanded to online language classes, and I hope that some of you take advantage of that. If you go to Cherokee.org, there are online language classes. The primary class that teaches online is taught by an instructor named Ed Fields. Ed Fields has been at this for a few years, and he's got it down. You get like a mix of Cherokee language and Cherokee culture. It's definitely immersive when it comes to Cherokee culture. But, his language teaching style online, it's hard to do immersion. So there's another guy named Wade Blevins that's working through one of our local universities, Rogers State University, RSU. You can get access to his course at the same Cherokee.org website. And he does a little bit more language immersion. He's not a first language speaker like Ed. You're going to get different things from Wade, from his RSU course, than you would from Ed Fields. But there is access for our at-large people. Now, locally, we have community language classes that have been on hold because of COVID. We also, as a part of this language department, it used to be under Education Services. Now we're all together under one department with our new administration. But all of these things that I've talked about so far under the leadership of a gentleman named Ward Boney Jr. And he was in charge of managing the language programs under the Education Department. Aside from the online language classes and the community language classes, Ward Boney also headed up the translation department. So these folks, these translators, could translate for legal purposes. If a Cherokee speaker went to court or they needed some sort of public service and they needed a translator, they were the official translators for the Cherokee people. They also translate things into Cherokee for publication, internal memos, external, advertisements, I guess you could call them. So anything that you see in Cherokee has to go through our translation department. So we have a huge, well, I wouldn't say huge, we have a good, robust team of very, very skilled translators that will take things from English to Cherokee or Cherokee to English. They don't really like to, translate people's tattoos or anything, but if it's official business, then if it's something that's needed, then they're always on hand to help out. Aside from the translation team, we also have, I've heard them call themselves Chala Geeks or Chala Geeks, and these are folks that, when Roy first started, before he became the manager of the language programs under education, language technology was its own little branch. And they created media for the immersion school, media for other classes, for education, for presentations. So this department is still there, and they're still constantly working with all the other departments to provide them with the resources that they need. It's just called Cherokee Technology or Language Technology. And so these are underneath Roy's leadership. And once these language programs were pulled and put into a larger language department, it was joined by the immersion school, where they teach the little kids how to go to school in Cherokee. And the immersion school is in partnership with the Bureau of Indian Education Schools, Sequoia High School, and they're creating an immersion track all the way through. So there's another program being developed for high school kids that leave immersion. And we also have an after-school program called the 14th Generation. Nigadusi Maine, Julinali Tunas, Tanai, Dide Squasti. That's the 14th Generation Academy that does after-school training for immersion school graduates. And some other folks from other school districts, since most of it's online, they get to work together. We call our immersion school Chalaka Wonahis, Junde Squasti, and that just really means the language school. The online classes, Asilate, we Chalaka Wonahis, Dinde Squasti. It's hard to read sometimes. That really means online Cherokee language classes. It's just a literal translation. And you can gain access to all of these programs through Cherokee.org. You can also, I'll send a flyer to Abraham, and he can give you access to this flyer. I guess it's a pamphlet that gives you public access to our language program. So the immersion school with the 14th Gen Sequoia High School's new immersion language track, that was all brought underneath the new language department as well. And it's under the leadership of a gentleman named Wyman Kirk. Now, Jeremy Hammer is the president of the immersion school, but Wyman Kirk is the administrator that handles that arm of our Cherokee language services. And these two, you can almost see them as departments, or well, they're bigger than programs, smaller than departments, because they all fit under one department, and that's just the Cherokee Language Department. And it's led by a gentleman named Howard Payton, Udawadisk, Udawadisk is the executive director of our language department. I've also mentioned our Master Apprentice Language Program, Chalak Gabonahis, Jundan Nilagay. It used to be Chalak Gabonahis on Usas, but that's what we're using as the title for the entire language department now. So we had to rename the Master Apprentice Program. And as I pointed out, this is 40 hours a week for 2 years to create language teachers. As we've developed this, we have recently received grants for 2 new programs. One is, we call it Asa Afani. Asa Afani is the teacher bridge. And it's going to be almost like year 3 and 4 for the Master Apprentice program, but it's going to take graduates from that program and other high-level Cherokee learners, younger native speakers that want professional teaching training, and we're going to develop their language skills. It's it's going to be very intense. We're translating teacher training or teacher preparation curriculum, TESOL curriculum, all about language learning, language acquisition from English college courses into Cherokee. And that will be the curriculum for the students for the next 2 years in this teacher bridge. So once learners get into this program, they're going to learn all the professional teaching skills that they would have access to in English, but we're going to teach it to them in Cherokee. And it's going to push their language ability along with their teaching skills. So we hope that by the time they get through with that program, they'll be nearly at native speaker level. We don't know what it's going to be like, but we know that they'll grow, and we know that they will be growing. They'll be growing focused on a language lexicon that is all about Cherokee teaching, Cherokee Language Arts. So that's the Teacher Bridge, a brand new grant we got. We also have what we like to call the Elder Grant. It's another grant that we got. Both of these grants are from Administration for Native Americans, ANA, and the Elder Grant, in Cherokee we call it Wijijesan Unidolsasai, which is like the Institute of Excellence. It's kind of a fancy name, but the idea is we're going to take, we've already selected younger first language Cherokee speakers that don't speak at the same level as our elders, but they can speak Cherokee. We're taking this youngest generation that can speak Cherokee, and we're taking these Cherokee documents that we've collected from institutions and museums all around the United States that are in Cherokee. We've collected about 15,000 of them. We're sorting through these documents, and we're choosing literature that is naturally difficult, that is narrative in nature, that shows an example of ideal Cherokee language in literacy form. And we're taking this with this team of learners, and we're translating it not from Cherokee to English, but from this natural high level of proficiency of Cherokee into something that we can use for teaching materials. It's from Cherokee to Cherokee, from fancy Cherokee to learning Cherokee, and we're going to use this to help develop teaching materials for all of our other Cherokee language programs. These learners are working on this Cherokee language, but they're also, we have contracts with elder native speakers in the community that speak the highest level of Cherokee that we can find. And through interaction between these language documents and the elders in the community, these language learners are going to develop their Cherokee skills, not just their ability to read and write and comprehend, but also their ability to communicate. They're going to take rare words and phrases, and they're going to take them to these elders, and they're going to use these elders as teachers and as resources to ensure that they understand these documents that they're translating into language teaching materials are exactly what they say that they are. They're going to develop a mastery of Cherokee in a way that young people haven't seen in quite some time. We're doing this to try to capture the highest level of Cherokee from our elders, because they aren't going to be around forever. And not only do we need to save Cherokee at the beginning level so everybody has access to it, but we need to be able to capture, preserve, and push forward and develop and grow the highest level of Cherokee proficiency that we can. So that's what this second grant is for. On top of that, we have a new program that administration has allowed us to cobble together called Speaker Services. Speaker Services, it's still a little amorphous, but because they're on the ground, what will happen is somebody will give one of our leaders a call, and they'll say, there's a speaker out here in this community. They have a big hole in their floor. They have a hole in their roof. Their water isn't working. They need help right now. And instead of making them go through all the process of paperwork and approval, we fast track approval. We get permission from our leaders. We go to that person in the community and we get the work done. The idea is that if we can improve the quality of life for our elders, for our Cherokee speakers, they're going to be around a lot longer. And the longer they're around, the more opportunity we have to strengthen and grow our language. We want to expand this speaker service idea to allow Cherokee speakers to have easy access to Cherokee services. You know, anybody who meets the income guidelines can go to Human Services or any of our other service departments. They fill out applications to apply for emergency relief or other sorts of services that the Cherokee Nation is contracted for through the Cherokee government. The federal government allows the Cherokee government to contract for these services, but we have to fill them out. People have to meet income guidelines, sometimes residency requirements. And that's a lot of paperwork for our Cherokee speakers to fill out, especially if they're not comfortable speaking English. Maybe they never learned to read and write English, and a lot of times they won't even try. So we want to expand speaker services to make sure that these elders, these Cherokee speakers, have an opportunity to apply for Cherokee Nation services, that just by the nature of the situation, the nature of the application process, they're denied almost by default if they cannot fill out the paperwork. So this is the state of our current affairs. In the future, we plan to expand our language programs out to our communities. Our local communities first. We want to focus on communities that have native speakers to ensure that no more generations will go by without continuing the Cherokee language. We need to pass this intergenerationally, from our elders to our young people. And if we can do that, we'll have a living, organic, and healthy language. If we can successfully do that in our Cherokee communities where Cherokee is strongest, then we'll be able to provide it to all of our Cherokee citizens, all of our Cherokee communities. We have to perfect it at home first. We have to perfect it with the people that have the most resources to be able to be successful. And once we figure out the best way to pass this language on in our families and in our communities outside of a classroom, then we want to provide access to all Cherokee individuals. The idea is language is a human right. The language of your people and of your ancestors is your human right. And we aren't going to force anybody to speak Cherokee, but we want to provide an opportunity for every Cherokee citizen to learn to speak Cherokee. I don't know, maybe in time we'll require Cherokee Nation to conduct some of its business in Cherokee. Maybe our employees will be expected to take language classes. There may be some incentives and possibly coercion involved, but the thing is, if we don't value our language, if our own employees and our own people don't value our language, how can we expect our elders to make the sacrifices to pass it down to us? We have to show them that their language is important. And one of the ways to do that is to show them that they're important because they have it. For too long, a lot of our Cherokee language speakers have been overlooked. In mainstream society, they were overlooked. They were not treated with respect. People hid the fact that they could speak Cherokee. Some people did their best to forget their own language. And this pattern persisted, and it snuck into our own tribe. At this point, our own leaders, they value the language. But a lot of times, it's not the folks that speak Cherokee that had the opportunity to go off to school and become educated. So a lot of times, these folks don't have the opportunity to have the professional degrees that they need to have leadership positions of the tribe. And so a lot of our leaders, they don't speak Cherokee. So we're trying to find ways to strengthen our Cherokee speakers and push them to the forefront and respect them for the knowledge and wisdom that they have. We believe that this wisdom is encoded in the language, that our worldview, the way that we understand the world, is tied to the way that we think about it and analyze it. And if you do that in the Cherokee language, it's going to look different than if you do it in any other language. So these Cherokee speakers, they have something special and sacred. And if we're going to ask them to share it with us, we have to show them the respect and honor that they've earned. Some of them don't want to be managers. Some of them don't want to be politicians. But one of the ways that we can honor them is by giving them a fair wage. In our language department, we make sure that our Cherokee speakers are well paid. We make sure that our learners are taught to respect our elders, that when a Cherokee speaker comes in the room, we stand up to give them our seat. It's cultural values like that that not only preserve our cultural identity through our values and behaviors and beliefs, but also our cultural identity through our language. Those people that study things, identity politics, all that stuff, they've been doing this for centuries. They've made note of those communities that have been most successful at maintaining who they are folks that have hung on to their language, their history, their sacred history, their religious belief system, and their land base. Well, for us as Cherokees, you're either Christian or you're ceremonial or something else. It really doesn't matter. But so religion is not quite as important. But we could tie all of those religions that are inherently Cherokee, that are tied to our Cherokee identity, together with our oral tradition, which would also include our sacred history. So if you tie those two together, we have a new land base. Here, our reservation in what was once Northeastern Oklahoma, before that Indian Territory. We have our language. The fourth piece is our kinship, and you guys know that more than anybody else. First thing that Cherokees do is they say, who are you related to? Who are your people? So these four things that tie us together will be strengthened as we strengthen our language. I could talk all day about language. However, there's a question here from Mary Price. I have a huge question. After I completed all of Ed Field's wonderful 3 levels of Cherokee language, I was hungry for more. Luckily, I discovered a Cherokee speaker, Alice Wilder, who teaches us via Zoom on her phone. About 6 weeks ago, I wrote the chief about somehow including her in the laptops for speakers in the nation. Understandably, the chief is exceptionally busy. Therefore, a few of us want to purchase Alice a laptop. With Cherokee language in mind and the ability to Zoom, what kind of laptop would you recommend for us to purchase for her? She doesn't know about this. It will be a surprise. Any recommendations would be very appreciated. I don't know. I know Alice. I don't know if she prefers Macs or PCs. So I am not a technology specialist. If you email Roy Boney, like I said earlier, he's the manager of language technology. Roy Boney, ROY-Boney, BONEY at Cherokee.org, and ask him about what sort of specs. I'm sure he could plug you in right away. He could probably give you a list of them. Sorry that I wasn't much help on that question. Here's another question from Andrea Rogers. Are the immersion students eligible for housing assistance, or does the education stipend scholarship provide enough to cover that as well? It doesn't really. It's $10 an hour, which is horrible for people outside of Oklahoma. It's not horrible for people here, but you can't buy a house and live off $10 an hour. They don't have to pay taxes on it, so that's nice. However, it doesn't really cover enough money for housing. The fact that they do not receive a real taxable income, however, does make them eligible for housing assistance. And we do provide them with the resources to apply for that. And we provide them with other supplementary resources for them to take advantage of, because they have no functional income while they're in our program. What kind of things does the department look for in the candidates selected for the adult immersion program? People that want to teach, people that want to live here and make a life commitment to teaching Cherokee for the rest of their life. That's basically what we're looking for. Our executive director, he started out, in this program as well, in our adult immersion program. And he and I used to interview people. One time he looked at me and he said that he had talked to an elder. And the elder said, he was talking about actually a missionary. This missionary was a really good preacher. I guess he had some gifts. And this elder was talking to this preacher, and the preacher said, why won't you come to my church? Why won't you help me? And the elder said, you don't sit still. You go from one church to the next, one church to the next. You don't sit still. And that missionary said, well, what would it take for you to start coming and help me and be my mentor? And he said, buy a grave plot. That's what he told me. And so that was the mindset that we went into with this language program. We want people that want to devote their life to it, and that makes it hard, because even if you live here, you're not necessarily going to have the exposure that you need to the language or to the language community to make that kind of life decision. So we've had some at-large people move here. We've had people move from Philadelphia, Wichita, Kansas, even California, and they've done well. They scouted ahead. They made sure this is one of their life choices, and when they decided to come and join the program, they were able to say with confidence, this is what they want to do from now on. Now, we can't hold them to it. If they decide to fly off to, Hawaii, spend the rest of their life teaching Hawaiian, we can't do anything to them. But when it comes to the process, the kind of candidates that we're looking for people that want to buy a grave plot. Not somebody that wants a medal on their chest for the language, but somebody that wants Cherokee speaker or Cherokee teacher on their tombstone. How's that for deep? Are there some other questions? Sorry, my allergies are bothering me. It's kind of all stopped up.
Ryan, can you talk a little bit about what inspired you to get into the language program and to start, your language career?
Yeah, it was a pure accident. My first exposure to Cherokee was when I was a kid. I always had long hair, and I didn't grow up in one of the 5 Cherokee counties that has our largest population of speakers. I didn't grow up here in the heart of Cherokee Nation. I grew up on the edge of it, and my family had moved there because they were cowboys and they worked the ranches for the Osages. And so my grandparents moved right to the edge of Cherokee land next to the Osage Reservation, and they kind of set up a permanent camp for my extended family to come and stay and work the ranches over at Osage Nation. And so we always had a lot of Cherokees coming over from Oaks and Kenwood and Locust Grove. And I got to hear Cherokee growing up. But I always thought there were people back home in those, deep-rooted Cherokee communities that were maintaining it. And it just never really seemed like it was for me. Even my own family would say things like, "Oh, well, you're not Indian enough to worry about it." And so I believed them. I wasn't Indian enough to worry about it. But I got into learning about our songs and our dances when I was in high school. I found out that my grandparents, my grandpa used to go to the grounds, and my grandma was Baptist. But they maintained that connection to their roots. And even though my grandpa didn't go to church with my grandma didn't go to the grounds with my grandpa, they loved each other. And they still loved their, spiritual traditions. And my grandpa passed away when I was pretty young, so I never really got to talk to him about it. It was kind of hush-hush in my family because grandma lived a little longer. But when I got older, I found out that that's what my family used to do. So I started going to some of our ceremonial grounds, and I learned really quickly that if you didn't speak Cherokee, you didn't have full access to what was going on out there. And so when I got to college, I was dancing on weekends, driving back to school, And one of the classes they offered was a Cherokee language class, and I was going to take it as my foreign language requirement, and then, you know, learn another language later. So I took Cherokee 1, took Cherokee 2, took Cherokee 3, and then I did an independent study. And at that point, I was in love and addicted to the language. And I realized really quickly I could not learn it in college because it's too much to learn. You know, when I graduated from college, I decided I was going to move back to Cherokee country, stay with my oldest aunt, and learn Cherokee. Now, she didn't talk a whole lot of Cherokee to me, but there were other elders in the community that wanted me to learn. And I spoke with them, and I just began to follow them around. I got a job at the Cherokee Heritage Center as a tour guide, and then I got a job at the tribe, and my interest was always in language. So that's what I've always pursued. Eventually, I saw these language programs growing and developing, and I taught some of the community language classes. I taught some of the employee language classes, and I was always just a few steps ahead of my learners because I wasn't a speaker. It wasn't my first language. I learned most of what I knew from college, not even from my own family. But with a lot of effort and time, my language began to grow. And as these language programs grew, I took advantage of every opportunity I could to be a part of the mix. And then after the immersion school started, our local university, Northeastern State University, decided that they needed to have a college degree program for teacher prep, Cherokee language teaching degree. So they partnershipped with the Department of Education at the university, and they created a new language department. And I hung out there. I was an adjunct teacher. I helped teach adult immersion classes. Ed and I helped develop the employee adult immersion language classes. So I was involved in all of that. And I got to talking to Wyman Kirk. He's now the administrator for the immersion school, but he was a professor at NSU during that time. And Wyman realized that Cherokee was not like French or Spanish or one of the other world languages. So there are these college classes where you can learn to become a French teacher or a Spanish teacher, and you're in these classes, you learn education stuff, you learn language stuff, and then like the last 6 months you go somewhere and you're immersed in that language, and you come back, you get your certification, take your subject area test, and you're a certified language teacher. We wanted to do the same thing for Cherokee. What we found out is that although the linguists have always said all languages are equally difficult to learn, we didn't realize that they were talking about for babies. For babies, every language is equally difficult. For adults, it's easier to learn languages similar to the language that you already speak. And Cherokee is very different than English. So Wyman, working with the Department of Defense, because they have all sorts of language schools for federal employees, for CIA folks, military intelligence, they fast-track language learning. And to do that, they categorized how much time was needed to learn different languages based upon how similar they were to English. And so they have a scale of 1 to 4. Level 1 languages take about 2,200 hours. Level 2 languages take about double that. Level 3 languages, triple it. Level 4 languages, quadruple it. It's basically how it works. So level 1 languages don't take as long to learn, like Spanish. Level 2 languages, like German, about twice as long. Level 3 languages, like Farsi, Arabic, those take quite some time. And one of the reasons why they're difficult is because they have a different writing system, a different orthography, like Cherokee does. And the level 4 languages are really different than English, like Chinese and even Japanese. Sometimes Japanese is considered level 3 or 4. They change these things every few years. I'm not up to date on the latest label, but he wanted them to rate Cherokee. Would Cherokee be 1 to 4? And they did an analysis of the language, and they wrote back and said, because of national security purposes, we cannot rate your language. It is not within the scope. However, if we were to rate your language, we would definitely put it at a 4, and if there was a 5, we would put it at a 5. So we're thinking, 10,000 hours to learn Cherokee. That's what we were thinking. And so we built an immersion program to do just that. And I was one of the, I wasn't ever officially a participant in the program, but as one of the developers, I was in the program and I was there every day, and I got to learn a lot of Cherokee. So over the last few years, my language has increased exponentially. It's given me access to the knowledge that elders are not easily able to put into English because these are abstract concepts. And although they can communicate in English, their highest level of thinking and communication is in Cherokee. And our deepest cultural subjects are best understood and transmitted in Cherokee. So that's a very brief rundown of my language journey.
That's awesome. I really appreciate that. That's what a transition from starting, from early on in your early years. But what that really signals to me is that, it gives hope to anybody. Anybody can go out there and, persevere and, get this language. And, my sister right now, of course, has decided to take this on. And so that's really awesome. For those who are starting out, maybe trying to learn on their own, to just get started, what advice do you have, just for beginning learners, maybe those who are at large and don't have access to all the resources here in the capital on the reservation? What's your advice to them?
Never give up. Never give up. I didn't get this all at once. It's taken me 20 years to get where I'm at. And it's really just been the last 2 years that I've had access to programs that have really helped me. Everything else was kind of cobbled together. Memorizing word lists, pestering elders, calling the translation department, calling Cherokee speakers, Facebooking with them, giving them gifts to thank them for the time that they've spent giving me the language. It was just cobbled together, and I if I would have given up, I would hit a plateau, and it just seemed like I wasn't learning anything for a long time, and I could have given up then. That happened to me 10, 15 times. I feel like that now because I'm an administrator. I don't get to sit in session like I would like to. I'm not learning like I was, but I'm never going to give up. I tell our speakers, I tell my teachers, Chalak. That means I will speak Cherokee. And you have to be crazy, hard-headed crazy to be successful. Now, there are some people that are just really talented and they pick up languages. I'm not one of those people. I had to be crazy. So I suggest that you be crazy. You pester these elders, you pester these speakers, you ask questions, you take notes, and then you use what you learn on the people around you, whether they want to learn Cherokee or not. Teach all your closest friends and relatives Cherokee, because if you take what you learn and you pass it on to the people around you, you will master it. And the only way that you're going to learn to speak Cherokee is if you change the way your mind thinks, and you have to do that through practice and practice and practice. If you want to learn Cherokee, you can and will do it. It just takes effort.
Widow, I really appreciate that. Throughout Cherokee history, throughout, a lot of Native history, you always get this really, kind of sad narrative, and even now you get this, a lot of sad news every day. Languages are dying, our health, with COVID, all of these challenges. We're currently, constantly bombarded, I feel like, with a lot of negative stuff. So it's just really awesome to hear, I'm this positive news about our language programs. I really feel like we're on an upswing. I feel like we've taken, faced so much adversity for so long. And, I'm just really excited. I'm really appreciative of all the work that you guys are doing, and of course, the sacrifices that you're making. Because like you said, a lot of these people, they're not making a lot of money, but, they're putting in the time, they're working on their own. A lot of our at-large citizens, are working with each other, teaching each other. So it's just really awesome. It makes me really hopeful. I'm really appreciative, and I really am hopeful for the future.
Well, no, Abraham, it's just been the last year, maybe year and a half, that I've had hope. I see positive changes, and I believe we will be successful. And as the elders around us start to see these changes, there's an enthusiasm that's building, which will only make it a guarantee of certainty.
That's really great. I'm really excited to hear that. So, on behalf of everybody, I just want to say Wado for the work that you do. We all appreciate it, and I'm learning, currently on my own, and it's been such a process. But it's just like you said, I appreciate what you're saying, to persevere. You get there and you're like, God, this is hard, and it's just and for me, I'm used to, I'm good at everything I've ever done, really, like math. I'm good at all of those subjects. And Cherokee is different, and you feel bad sometimes. You're like, God, I should know this already. At times it's even made me feel less Cherokee or feel not good enough. So I've had to work through all of those different emotions to where I can just continue to persevere, though, and not let myself fail.
I agree with you 100%. I was told if you don't talk Cherokee, you're not. That's a Hionegazoo. And the people around me, I thought I should know this. This is in my blood. This is in my environment. This is something that I should have already known. Mm-hmm. But the fact that you just have to be gentle with yourself, and just because it's in your blood and in your people and around you, doesn't mean that it's going to be easy or it's going to be natural. In mm-hmm. fact, it seems to be harder for people that have more exposure to it because they do have this expectation that they should already speak it. So sometimes it's easier for somebody that hasn't had a speaker in their family for generations to step in and pick up the language. But it's going to take all of us. And my goal is for every Cherokee citizen to have the opportunity to speak the language. And in 20 years, if I'm still alive, I'm going to do everything I can to make it happen and to make the Cherokee language the language of our nation again.
That's awesome. I'm really happy to hear that. I have one final question before we get out of here today. When you are learning the Cherokee language, I see it accompanied a lot with the syllabary. How should people approach that? Should they learn the syllabary first or learn it alongside? Because, I have a lot of people who ask questions about that.
It's hard to say definitively. In our program, we focus on communication, speaking. And if people need to take notes, we say take it however it makes sense to you. If you need notes, write it in a way that you understand what you're writing. If you already know syllabary, great. If you don't know syllabary, that's fine. But I know that isn't a communicative language class. So if you aren't focused on conversational language, sometimes it's really ideal to have access to all the written materials that you can get your hands on. And those are going to be in syllabary. So I think that for folks that are going to take the literacy approach, go ahead and learn the syllabary. You don't have to have it mastered before you start learning content and what the words mean and how to put them together, but it will give you access to all the things that has ever been written in Cherokee.
Great. Wado, I really appreciate that. I think that, answers a lot of questions that people have about language. And so, but like I said, it's exciting. So I appreciate your time. Thanks for joining us today. All of you out there, thanks for joining us to talk about language. Like he says, this is how we continue to perpetuate it, is to keep talking about it and keep helping each other. And I like what you said about, being kind to ourselves, showing that compassion, in our journey to learn again about our culture, about our history and about our language. I think that's really important.
Yeah. Thank you, sir. We didn't lay it down. It was taken from us. Mm-hmm. So we can't blame ourselves.
Definitely right. All right. Wado, everybody. I hope you guys have a great day.